I'm Disclosure Dad. Today, we're going to be talking about Mars, specifically life on Mars. Now, believe it or not, NASA has not confirmed the existence of life on Mars, but using their own data today, I'm going to prove it. So, the first thing we're going to talk about is one, the life on Mars that I can prove using NASA's own data, and two, the life on Mars that I cannot prove, but I have data from two remote viewers that suggest there is far more life on Mars now and in the distant past than NASA or most people are even willing to consider. I'm Disclosure Dad. Let's disclose some truths. Honestly, most people believe that there is life on Mars. The funny thing is, my son, when I talked about this video, he genuinely thought that we'd already discovered that there was life on Mars, at least microbial life. And I think many people believe that there is life on Mars. However, unfortunately, the official NASA position is that there's not life on Mars. So the question is, well, why? Haven't we been testing things and so forth there? Well, we did. In 1976, we sent two identical Viking probes to the surface of Mars. Those Viking probes had tests on board, actually for them, that were there to detect the presence of life. And unbeknownst to many people, all four tests came back positive. So, case closed, right? Everything's fine. All positive. And that was interesting because that was true of both Vikings in both locations. There are two of them. So the big question is, okay, well, all of those experiments came back positive. What's the big deal? There's life on Mars. End of story, right? Unfortunately, it wasn't that easy. The problem that we ran into was that the gas chromatograph mass spectrometer test, big name, but what it really tested for was the presence of organic compounds, which are created by life itself or life needs to exist. This is essential. You need organic compounds to have life. If there are no organic compounds, there is no life. Now, this test found organic compounds, so what's the problem? Well, the problem was that these compounds were in such small amounts, fairly trace amounts, that the scientists at the time assumed that both of them were somehow contaminated, which of course is one possible idea. As it turns out, that was not the end of the story. In 2008, an important discovery was found. It turns out that on the surface of Mars, there are extensive perchlorides. When heated with the experiment of the mass spectrometer, actually destroyed almost all of the organic compounds during the testing process. So the test itself destroyed the evidence before the evidence was found. That was proven in 2008. We also had the Perseverance and Curiosity rovers who later on found massive numbers of organic compounds throughout Mars. And in a paper, recently peer-reviewed paper, it was proven that those organic compounds could not have been formed by abiotic processes like meteor deposits or other things like that. In other words, because of the complexity and the scale or the number of organic materials that were found on Mars, the only explanation was that there must have been historically in the past some kind of life on Mars. Well, if we look at what happened in the Viking experiment in 1976, we proved with the label release experiment that there is active life on the surface right now. And the only missing link was the presence of organic materials. Now that we have proof that organic materials are extant on the surface of Mars, we can put those two data points together and prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that there is indeed life on the surface of Mars, at least microbial life. You might say, hey, that's great. So where can I read that from a NASA report? And you should be able to, except for one little problem. I call it the slippery slope problem. The problem is, if you acknowledge that there is life on Mars, any planet actually other than Earth, you acknowledge that there's a second genesis. And obviously the first being on Earth. If there's a second genesis on Mars, that means there's probably life on, very likely, the moons of Saturn, the moons of Jupiter. If there's life on those places, then it's possible that most likely there's life throughout the cosmos. Acknowledging life on Mars, even microbial life, means that now you have to acknowledge the real possibility of life landing in your backyard in a UFO. Why? Because that's the logical conclusion. It's a slippery slope very fast. So NASA has fought tooth and nail not to disclose anything, knowing that if they disclose microbial life on Mars, people would start looking at these accounts of UFOs and other things and say, wait a minute, couldn't those be real? Couldn't those possibly be real? After all, if there's life on Mars, there could be life elsewhere. And some of it's much older than us. Getting from their home to ours could be literally nothing. And the science, the theories behind how that would happen has already really been discovered here on Earth. And you can talk about that in another episode. We've now proven that there is indeed life on Mars, not in the distant past, but today, using NASA's own research with the Viking probe in 1976, as well as a Curiosity and Perseverance rovers recently, which filled in that missing gap. Let's move on to something a little more interesting. There's two types of data. Obviously, the NASA is great because we can verify, but there's other types of evidence. There's remote viewing, and we've got data. I have data now from 2 different remote viewers that are available publicly about Mars, who've actually gone to Mars to remote view what's on Mars and bring back amazing information. One is Joe McMoneagle, the other one is Elizabeth April. Let's talk about remote viewing quickly for those of you who may not know what remote viewing is. Remote viewing is a telepathic ability to see or bring back information on a target that is very far away in distance. This was actually developed by the CIA, by their own admission, in the 1970s. It's a process that involves a controller who has a target. They usually take this target, they put it into an envelope. It could be photos or could be just a written description of what the target is. Then they put on top of the envelope numbers. Usually these are randomly generated numbers. They don't really mean anything. They're just connected to the envelope. The controller gives that to a monitor. Doesn't know what's in the envelope. They have no clue. They're just there to help run the experiment. The third person is known as a subject. Also, we call them the remote viewer. This subject is only given those random numbers and nothing else. The monitor, who is also blind, they have no idea what's in the envelope either, to help them guide them through their session. So the remote viewer will then usually go into some sort of a relaxed state and start getting images or whatever about the target that they're trying to assess. And then once all that's done and the session is over, then and only then does the remote viewer and the monitor get a chance to open up the envelope and find out were they accurate or was it completely off. They had to be 65% or higher in accuracy over various, controlled tests to be able to be used on operational missions. Typically, they were much higher than that. And Joe McMoneagle, who we'll be talking about in a minute, was remote viewer number 1 in the CIA program. And his hit rate was usually in the high 80s to 90s. Joe was given this target. And remember, he didn't know the target. The target was Mars 1 million BC. He didn't find that out till later. So he goes, whoa, what is this? I'm seeing pyramids larger than the pyramids at Giza. Is this some sort of new discovery on Earth? He described these massive pyramids that had large internal structures, which he noted is very strange because pyramids are not built like that. Pyramids, if you see like the pyramids of Giza, they have small internal spaces, lots and lots of stone, very small internal spaces. This had massive internal spaces. He said it was absolutely huge. The rooms were enormous. And he's thinking to himself, okay, what is this? And as he's looking through it, he's looking around this pyramid, he discovered the thing is empty. Well, empty. It had lots of chambers for people. He felt it was a place where people went to hibernate during like storms or whatever.
And that's the pyramid. Now, what's really interesting about this particular pyramid is you notice it's sitting on the side of the impact crater. And that's a real trick, because that means the pyramid had to be put there after the impact crater. Because if the impact crater hit after the pyramid was there, it would have destroyed the pyramid. You can't have one and not the other. You understand what I'm saying?
He got the impression there had been some sort of a catastrophe of some sort. He felt it was some sort of maybe a comet's tail or something hit the planet and stripped away the atmosphere, and that these temples or this pyramid had been built to protect people and to help them basically await someone else who might come to save them. And according to him, that person never came, or those people never came. They all died. The species actually completely died out. And he described them as approximately 10 feet tall, human looking, but taller than us, which kind of makes sense of low gravity. Another target he got was something called the fort.
This is an old fort. Now, what's interesting about the old fort, and it's something most people don't recognize, this is actually a pyramid. The tip is missing off the top and it's hollow. I don't know if you can see that. That's a grouping of pyramids, and that's a building, or what's left of a building on a sort of a plateau, and that's the drawing I did of the larger beings.
He was asked to go back to the time before this was destroyed and before the end of the society. And obviously the pyramids were in better shape back then. He saw it was much shinier and clean and so forth, and that there was an extant civilization across the surface of Mars. But after whatever this catastrophe was, that most of the Martians had died out, and that a few of them had actually, according to him, had fled to Earth, which I guess this is we're talking 1 million plus years ago. Earth wasn't a great place to live at that time. It was very hostile. But that's where they went, according to him. And his own personal theory, he believes that they are we are the descendants of the Martians. And we might be to some extent, but I think there's more to that story. When he found out what the target was, it was actually the Cydonia area in Mars. If you're not familiar with that, this is where the face in Mars, the famous face in Mars is. And there are many, many pyramids there. If you'd like to hear Joe McMoneagle describe his Mars remote viewing in his own words, there's a link in the description below. The next remote viewer I want to talk about is Elizabeth April and her Mars remote viewing, which is amazing. Elizabeth April's, her links are in the description here for her YouTube channel, as well as her website, where she has way more videos. Elizabeth April is trained in the military style remote viewing, but she's also a naturally gifted psychic and has been doing remote viewing for pretty much most of her life, from what I understand. I think it really took off when she was 16, 17, 18 years old. All right, let's talk about Elizabeth April and her remote viewing of Mars. Elizabeth April does things a little bit differently. She actually connects with aliens on a regular basis. Whether you believe it or not, this is her data. Like I said, this is for you, great. If not, that's okay. I understand. This is what I can't prove. But Elizabeth talks to an organization called the Galactic Federation of Light. And yes, it's similar to Star Trek Galactic Federation. They have a ship supposedly somewhere in the solar system. And whenever she has a question, she goes and she talks to someone, psychically on the ship. And she's been doing this for years. She has a whole number of videos about this. I highly recommend it. She was talking to a being named Zeta, who said that Mars today is actually used as a wayfaring spot. It's been used by many different alien species. That all the activity on Mars now is beneath the surface. There are, meeting rooms down there. There are transit in and out sections for spacecraft coming in and out of the solar system, I guess, of which there are many. Apparently, according to her, Earth is kind of a hot spot for a lot of different alien species who want to check on what's happening on Earth. A lot of species, according to her, have a vested interest in what's happening with humans right now, which is interesting. She said there's mining operations under the ground in Mars as well. They basically, from Elizabeth April's perspective, Mars is a bustling place. It's just not bustling in the way of an active planet. That the groups involved are using it as a way station. It is, according to Zeta, was explaining to her that there was a catastrophe on Mars. It ended, some time ago. And that since the collapse of the civilization on Mars, it's been used for these other purposes.
There's one really massive base on Mars, or under Mars, I would say. It looks like they're all based mostly underground. There's also some I don't want to call them relics, but there's some ancient sites around Mars as well that are above ground, but kind of like the pyramids, or kind of old ancient sites on planet Earth. It was basically just a huge room. It was just such a stark contrast to the above ground of the planet, because it's all just sort of powdery and red. And then when you go underneath, it's all very clean and metal and very futuristic. I asked a question is the Galactic Federation here? I saw that they had a base on the planet as well, if not multiple bases on that planet. That's how they oversee the planet. How do I say this? It felt like it had citizens of Mars in the base, in the Galactic Federation base, and then it had sort of Galactic Federation members in the base as well. So he went in to say that there was a giant explosion that happened on that planet. I just kept getting a big explosion, but it seemed like it was very populated, and then a huge cataclysm happened, and then it was not populated. But some of the beings who were on Mars were off planet, and then they came back. And now a lot of the beings there who are they all look there's definitely a different variety.
Mars collapsed because of an imbalance that they she said imploded or exploded themselves, which is interesting because McMoneagle said they were wiped out possibly by a comet's tail. That might have been involved in some capacity. Like that might have been why the pyramids were built originally. I don't know if both these things are connected. But there is some interesting data. I would like to add to this is not part of the remote viewing. And there's a compound, xenon 129, that is only created by two ways. One, through a nuclear bomb going off, probably an H bomb specifically, an H bomb going off, or in the heart of a supernova. Now, what's really interesting is on the surface of Mars, this material exists on the surface of Mars all over the place. But more specifically, there are two locations on either side of the planet that have high concentrations of this element, and they reduce as you get further away from these places. And people have speculated, scientists have calculated, that if indeed there was a nuclear blast or hydrogen blast on the surface of Mars in the distant past, there would have been two of them, and that to leave as much material as we saw and to cause the kind of damage that we see on the planet, it was probably 2 500 megaton hydrogen bombs, thermonuclear bombs. And to give you a reference point, for those of you who might remember, the Tsar Bomba was the largest nuclear device ever exploded above the ground in the world. That was created by the Russians. The Tsar Bomba was 50 megatons. So the explosions, hypothetical possible explosions on Mars, were 10 times larger than that. It was two of them. And any scientist looking at it says, yeah, based on the real material that we're finding on the surface of Mars, if this was placed there, like I said, most likely by two massive thermonuclear events, it appears that they did blow themselves up, that this society ended themselves because of possibly nuclear war or some other, I'm assuming nuclear war, but kind of crazy. I can definitely see why that is something we don't talk about. We've got two different remote viewers who have similar but different stories. We've got Joe McMoneagle, who talks about, some sort of cataclysmic event that forced these people, these 10-foot aliens, into these pyramid structures to try and survive. None did, but then a few left Earth. We've got Elizabeth April and talking to Zeta from the Galactic Federation of Light, saying that Mars basically imploded or destroyed itself due to an imbalance, as he called it, likely thermonuclear based on other evidence we have. And also in her remote viewing saw that they came to Earth. So very similar. Once again, these are just data points. I think it's interesting. I cannot prove either way. I genuinely don't know. As I always say, trust but verify. So once again, data points. What's the level of confidence? Life on Mars from the NASA research, confidence very, very high. Life on Mars, under the surface via Elizabeth April's and maybe a million years ago, I'd have to say a bit lower because I need more data points, but it's interesting. I've been editing the video and I want to add one more thing. I have another data point regarding the Galactic Federation. In 2020, Haim Shed, who is considered to be the father of the Israeli space program, did an interview with an Israel newspaper. He's a retired brigadier general. He's highly respected even to this day. He's launched over 20 satellites, including communication satellites and spy satellites, et cetera, for the Israelis, very deep into the program. He told this Israeli newspaper during the interview that there exists a galactic federation, his words, that is very similar to Star Trek, that it is in agreement right now with the United States and multiple other countries on the planet to share technology, to exchange DNA information, and also combined with multiple research projects that are done both here and, interestingly enough, according to him, on Mars in underground bases, which correlates with what Elizabeth had said. So, interesting. Does that mean the Galactic Federation is real? I don't know, but this is another data point, something to consider when we are looking into what the truth really is. This has been a very interesting video on life on Mars, that life that I can prove and life that I can't prove. But I think it's interesting. I think the remote viewing data is compelling. Obviously, as you know from watching the channel, I'm a firm believer in psychic abilities, and remote viewing is just that. It's another type of psychic ability, very trained one in some cases. If you're interested in getting more psychic information about Mars specifically, I do know of 2 other remote viewing groups that actually have gone to Mars, and they have slightly different information. Let me know. I may make a video about that. And obviously, please like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. I'm Disclosure Dad. Let's disclose some truth together.